You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
Hey, Los Angeles, what is going on? Welcome back to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, live on the Mighty 1090 ESPN Radio. I'm your co-host, Ryan Dyer, joined as always by the madman, Jamal Madney. Excited to talk Bolts, Los Angeles Chargers coming off a big preseason week one win. It's preseason, but a win is a win, and the second and third unit looked very strong for this Bolt team. Joint practices started today. Recording is Thursday. They have joint practice today and tomorrow on Friday, leading into their Sunday preseason game. So we're going to talk what we saw from joint practice, talk about some matchups we're looking forward to on Sunday. But first, my man, Jamal, what's up, brother? How we doing?
Doing well, Rye. Excited to be talking some Bolt conversation. We got games to be talking about. We got joint practices to be talking about. The offseason is officially over, and we have real football to talk about. How exciting is that?
Real football. It's great. It started last week, and all the expectations for this Chargers team. And again, I don't want to keep saying it because it's told to say, I know it's preseason, but hey, at least some of those expectations spilled over, and we saw it from the second and third unit, and the offense looked completely different. The defense looked a lot sharper. The quarterback play from Easton Stick looked very, very good. We saw some good receiver play. The special teams saw an 81-yard punt return from Darius Davis. So we'll kind of blend some of that in. I know we didn't have time, unfortunately, to do a recap show, so we'll blend that into kind of our preview show here and kind of mix it all together like a melting pot. But I think it's exciting to see these expectations starting to spill over. Still a long way to go. We still got, 2 to 3 weeks of preseason before week one of actual football, but it's good to see that, Jamal. And it's exciting to see where this team is today versus where this team was today a year ago. And I think it's leaps and bounds better than what it was, and that's the excitement. So before we get all into it, show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. It's going to give you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Get those Justin Herbert MVP bets in. He's in the top 5. Might as well make it happen. See if he can lock his name in its history as one of a few Chargers MVPs add his name there. So betonline.ag, promo code BELIEVE. Tell them the guys at the LA Football Network sent you. So Jamal, I want to get into kind of what this first day of joint practice looked like. I think there's some good takeaways from the defensive line. Keenan Allen obviously is looking like his old self. But first, because we haven't really talked, just want to get your initial thoughts on that preseason win over the Rams. I think overall, I kind of mentioned it in my little monologue there, but just what was your takeaways of that preseason win?
I thought it was a terrific performance, Ryan. Very dynamic, very explosive. Obviously, some stars to be mentioned there. Darius Davis was, looked like a little bit like, Tyreek and Dion there on that punt return, especially where the way he was setting guys up and almost walked in to sort of that punt return. His first few steps were almost walks, and then he sort of set up a couple defenders there. That outside in move was absolutely phenomenal, and then it was just the afterburner. So to see just his home run ability, his explosiveness, yet another dimension that this team could potentially be as dangerous to score when Justin Herbert's on the field versus when he's not. I mean, that to me is just a staggering situation. Love seeing Quentin Johnson in the end zone there early. That was a phenomenal, nice grab in traffic, nice inside slant there in the red zone, used that frame really well. And finished it off quite nicely. That's so encouraging to see from the first round pick. And then obviously kind of the star of the show in the second half was Elijah Dotson with, those two, very dynamic runs on the outside. He wasn't touched, but really put on the afterburners. That first touchdown also, he kind of taunted some of the Rams on the way back there. And so there was a swag, there was an explosiveness. You mentioned Easton Stick. I think he, sort of didn't have to do too much, but, put the ball in the hands of his playmakers and let them do their thing. But I think the one thing you could already see, even in terms of the first game, was just the verticality and the dimensionality of the offense is different this year. And Kellen Moore is just bringing a different geometry to the offense than Joe Lombardi did. And, you can just see you were sort of on the edge of your seat in terms of what they were going to run next. It didn't matter that the first string wasn't there for the most part, but just what they were going to do, what, packages of plays they were going to run. it was something that you were very intrigued to watch and sort of kept you on your toes. The Lombardi offense last year was just so predictable from time to time. It was so stale from time to time. So just that freshness to me really stood out. So lots to be excited about. I mean, when you sort of factor in the Justin Herberts and the Keenan Allens and the Mike Williamses actually being in these slots and kind of running these plays versus the guys that were out there, I mean, it's really a frightening proposition. And then the other guy who I thought played really well, even though Dotson kind of stole the show at the end, was Josh Kelley. I thought Josh Kelley did some really nice things in terms of finding holes up the middle, finishing runs, bouncing to the outside. There was a bounce in his step. He was able to finish quite nicely. And then, I think everyone really did an outstanding job. It was a collective team effort. Defense did some really nice things in terms of sacks as well. A dominating opening win from a preseason perspective for the Chargers. So every bit is advertised and moving forward.
Yeah, all running backs, I guess, outside of Larry Roundtree, who was cut the day after, but Isaiah Spiller looked good as well. So the
Spiller
running
looked
game
really good as well. Yes.
The running, I mean, collectively as a unit, the team had only like 106 yards passing. Even
it was over 250 on the ground. I mean, it was just, turn it around and give it to your backs. And, it was 5.5 yards a carry. I mean, it felt like a college game out there.
It was great. And, we've talked a lot, Jamal, that explosive plays doesn't mean you have to hurl it 60 yards down the field.
Exactly.
Explosive plays is just chunk plays, no matter if you throw it 5 yards, if you run it, whatever it is. And they got those in spades in week one. So that was kind of, I think, a great building block. The last thing I'll say, and then we can move on into this week and the preview is, in regards to Quentin Johnston, I thought what I was most pleased with is he had some struggles early, had a one blatant drop, had one very difficult drop, the over the shoulder deep pass. I mean, it was a drop, but it's a very tough play, especially in your first game ever in the NFL. And then another one that was, I wouldn't even put it on him, but technically goes as a drop. So technically 3 drops. To me, I only really count 1. But when you have that start and then you come out of the game, it looks like his night's done. And the team puts him back in that 2-minute drill, and he's able to get the touchdown on that 2-minute drill. That was, I think, an absolute masterclass in coaching in terms of needing to lift up your young playmaker, because I wasn't a good receiver, but I played receiver in high school. You have a couple drops, you get the yips, you get real nervous. I mean, you start thinking, all you think about is not dropping the football, and your routes take a hit, your playmaking after the catch take a hit, all those things when you're only focusing on catching because it gets in your head, it's a big deal. And so I think he had those early jitters, whatever you want to call them. They take him out, they put him back in for that. He gets the touchdown, and I think that sets his trajectory back right on track where they want him to be. So it's a small detail. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I think to me, that was a really big thing for this team and for Quentin Johnston personally to say, A, my coaches have my back. B, yes, I belong out here, and I proved that on that beautiful dime pass from Easton Stick, but I had to catch it in between traffic between 3 different defenders and haul it in right before half. So love seeing that from this coaching staff and from him as an individual.
No doubt, Ryan, and it's not a small, detail in any way, shape, or form. I couldn't agree with you more. And we were talking about this earlier, Ryan, when we were talking about the Rams, and some of this is coaching, especially at this stage of the season, is about managing development and managing confidence. And, just think about how Quentin Johnston would be feeling about himself over the course of this week if he was ultimately pulled out that first time and his night was done. And now he sort of is able to come back in, catch the touchdown in traffic, use his frame, use his hands, get confidence in that again. And now it sets him up to continue to grow and develop week after week. So I thought that was a really terrific point. I think he's just going to get more comfortable. These taller receivers, Ryan, the taller, slender receivers, it takes them a little bit of time whenever they go to kind of the next level, whether it's high school to college or college to the pros, you're sort of getting used to your body in a different game. And, the throwing windows are a lot narrower. The breaks have to be a lot sharper. You have to be so much more intentional in a quicker period of time. So I think, that was all sort of part of the process with Q. And now I think the game's going to slow down for him week over week. And I think it's also, he had some of his teammates both, with him as well as against him. And so I think there was a lot there. And I think the other piece of it, Ryan, that sometimes doesn't get talked about, you mentioned kind of the masterclass in coaching from an emotional standpoint. I think he kind of came into the game with the yips because the last time he was in that stadium, he lost by 58, so it's kind of hard to, it's sort of hard to come in super confident, like I'm ready to own the world as the first round pick. The guy literally lost by 8 touchdowns the last time he was on the field. So I think, just having a positive experience over the course of that first half and that final play, I think is going to do wonders.
Yeah, absolutely. So great point. And that's good to hear overall. So, all right. Well, looking at day one of, again, we apologize. We won't have an updated, well, maybe we'll do a quick hit something tomorrow after day 2. But for this scenario, day 1 is in the books, and, reports out of camp where the big shining bright spot, which I don't think is a surprise to either of us, Jamal, the defensive line looked absolutely dominant. And I think we've said a few times that if you can get a top 5 Joey Bosa and a top 12 Khalil Mack in terms of pass rushing, whatever you want to call it, PFF grades, different statistics that decide those rankings, but basically 2 guys in the top 12. And then you have the likes of Sebastian Joseph Day. Austin Johnson didn't play yet. He came off the PUP list, but he's still banged up. But you have depth at that interior. Morgan Fox has looked tremendous. You have arguably one of the best front 4s in all of football. And then, oh, by the way, you add in a budding Kenneth Murray, who there's been a lot of chatter and excitement about him, and an Eric Kendricks, who is just a stalwart in this league and has been great his whole career. So the fact that they're doing what they're doing and they just dominated a fairly good Saints offensive line, Ryan Ramczyk is no slouch. They have some good pieces there on the offensive line. It doesn't surprise me, but it's good to hear because we've been saying if they can be that unit, it's going to go through them. And as long as they can stay healthy, it's going to be a dominant force. So it's great to hear that they're looking that way early so far in these, fall practices.
It really is, Ryan. And I think you said it best there. I mean, if this all comes together the way we believe it will, and the way, as long as they can kind of stay healthy and motivated, I mean, my God, this is just a scary proposition here. I mean, it is scary. I mean, the rest of the league, I think everyone, the narrative nationally, you and I were talking about this a little bit offline just yesterday. There was an article that ESPN came out about chargering, and, it was a 7-page article, went through the history of what that meant, not just the Jaguars game last year, but they pulled in Dan Fouts, they pulled in Stan Humphries, they pulled in all of these guys, and talking about that. So the national narrative is about the Chargers is all about looking back and looking in the past and how Justin Herbert has to sort of change this history. But for folks that understand this team, that are close to this team, like how we are at the LA Football Network, this is a scary team moving forward. This is a top 3 team in terms of talent in this league right there to me with the Eagles and the Bills. And if this front 4 in particular, and then you throw in Kendricks and Murray, and, you sort of look at it holistically from a front 7 perspective, if they play anywhere near their potential, I mean, you're talking about a team that potentially will finish top 5 in defense and top 5 in offense. I mean, that's really kind of the barometer here of what this team is capable of doing. So the fact that they're bringing that mentality from week 1, from week 2 of camp and sort of dominating the way they're supposed to. They were dominant in the game against the Rams. I think the leading rusher for the Chargers wasn't Elijah Dotson. It might have been Stetson Bennett because he kind of ran more in the Chargers' direction than anyone else. That really spoke to that defensive line. And the fact that it's carrying over just a few days later with another team who, oh, by the way, there's some clever things that they're trying to do offensively and, with guys that are capable, guys like Jake Haener and others in some of these scrimmages. And so the fact of the matter that the Chargers dominated the way they did, it's very exciting. And look, it just sort of sets the expectation for what this team can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, the easiest way you end the charging narrative, because typically charging is what? You blow games, whether it's offensively.
Yeah.
You choke. And the easiest way to get rid of that narrative this season is the pass rush. Championship teams close games out with their pass rush. We've seen time and time again, sometimes you have that juggernaut offense that just blows teams out, and you have that quarterback that just puts a team on his back, and obviously that's one way to do it. Guess what? The Chargers have that, so they have that option. But sometimes you lean on your defense that on that last drive that they just close the door and finish the game out by putting the quarterback on his back in the backfield. The Chargers, for whatever reason, even last year, partially because Joey Bosa was banged up almost all year, and then Khalil Mack couldn't be as dominant by himself, kind of is at that point in his career. He needs that running mate. They didn't really have the depth. Chris Rumph was still kind of finding his body and getting used to it. Chris Rumph also looked very good in that first preseason game. And so if they can have that pass rush, whether it's from the interior or obviously the two big names on the outside, that's how you dispel that rumor. Because if you have a 7-point lead or a 3-point lead, and you are confident your defense can go out there, get a pass rush, and just end the game there and not have to put it on your quarterback to have those comebacks with 45 seconds, comebacks with a minute 30, that makes life a whole lot easier. And so that is what I want to see, and it's good to hear that they're doing that in practice against the Saints team who has a good offensive line. So, we're on track. Team's on track.
We're on track, Ryan. I mean, you hate to kind of get into the comparison game here, but the 2023 Chargers feel a little bit like the 22 Bills. When you look at kind of this defensive line and the quarterback and just this ascent and also kind of dealing with the baggage of history. I mean, the 2022 Bills obviously had the heartbreak with the Mahomes game, the 13-second game, but you go all the way back and in terms of all the Super Bowl losses in the 90s and just this fan base that's just hungry to sort of win one finally and do something positive. And here you have Josh Allen making his ascent, and how excited, the Bills insiders were really about the front four and the front seven last year. Remember the conversations we were having before week one and kind of these projections of this team should go 14-3 and 15-2 because of just not really about Allen and Diggs and all the guys that are kind of getting the pub on one end, but it's really all about this front four and the front seven. And the Chargers feel a little bit that way as well in terms of if these guys can just sort of put it together and play to their level and stay healthy. I mean, this is sort of a frightening proposition here. And so I kind of see some parallels here. I mean, the Bills used to stand for "Boy, I love losing Super Bowls." And so, that was their acronym. And now we've got a whole national article here on what the definition of chargering is. I mean, it's bad when you've become a verb, I mean, that's always sort of problematic is when, the composition of your name kind of changes and becomes a verb. And so you're carrying this history. But moving forward, I think there's just a lot to be excited about. And to your point, Ryan, so many games were one-possession games last year when they really shouldn't have been. Yeah. And so many games kind of had to come down to a 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, where Herbert had to throw a dart to kind of close the game out with the first down. And if anything went wrong there, they were going to give the ball back. And if you can close that door with that pass rush and sort of dominate a game in terms of the end, that's what it's going to take to go deep into the playoffs when you have to go on the road, when you have to play against these elite quarterbacks. So very exciting about what's to come.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I think the proposition and the ability that they have. And I think Chargers fans and Bills fans, if they don't already, would get along great. I mean, there's so much similarities that,
oh my God. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's also it's so funny, right? Because the Bills are sort of like New York in air quotes, but not really. They're sort of not quite the big city. Chargers are sort of still getting used to LA. Are they true LA? It's debatable. It's still sort of a work in progress. Both dealing with this sort of tormented history, both with iconic young quarterbacks, really talented rosters, and can they kind of both get over the hump and win a Super Bowl? They're 2 of 12 franchises yet to win a Super Bowl. They're both in it kind of together, and I'm sure Herbert and Allen are going to meet each other a few times in the playoffs on the road to a Super Bowl. So a lot of parallels there for sure.
Yeah. Both fans they deserve more respect nationally than they get. Bills fans are the most, everyone loves Bills Mafia and gives them credit. No one gives Charger fans credit. They're due for their credit and as a diehard fan base. On radio, going to break. We'll be back with college talk. Jamal, I probably have one more point we can continue on the podcast, but on radio, we'll be back right after this with some USC and UCLA talk. All right, so I want to finish with this. Well, we'll do 2 points if you have anything else, again, I'll always jump in. I don't want to run the whole show, but got to talk Keenan Allen real quick because Keenan Allen has been dominating in camp, looking like old Keenan Allen. Looks like he's just having fun again, making one-handed catches. He's basically virtually unstoppable over the middle. Part of it to me, and then I want to get your thoughts, is I think he's fully healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Last year was just banged up all year, kept trying to come back, never looked fully right. And part of it, I think he just is so built for this Kellen Moore offense. And the fact that he kind of got pigeonholed last year into like the slot in Joe Lombardi's offense. And now he's that dual threat of he can be slot, he can be outside, put him wherever because he's that talented. And it's going to keep the defenses guessing too, because, he has that optionality. And we've seen it I've been at training camp. We obviously aren't going to see him in the preseason games, but seeing him there and then obviously hearing all the chatter and talk is, we might see, and this is all speculation, we're heading into week 2 of preseason, but we might see Keenan Allen's best year as a pro because he's fully healthy. He's got a year 5 quarterback now in Justin Herbert, and he's got this really fun offense that is going to really hone in and utilize his skill set to the best of his ability, which is all a coach and scheme should do, is utilize your players' skill sets to what they do best. And it seems like that is what's going to happen with Keenan Allen. So I'm fired up about where Keenan Allen's at. I think this Chargers receiving core, I don't want to say is being slept on, but I think they've gotten, and I don't also want to say they're being disrespected, but I think they've gotten forgotten about a little bit in terms when you look at top duos in the league. Everyone talks about Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, rightfully so. Everyone talks about some of these other great pairings around the league. You don't hear a ton of people talking about Keenan Allen and Mike Williams because A, they haven't been fully healthy together very often, and B, the offense was such a shell of itself last year, and there's a lot of unknown this year. But 4 weeks into training camp, it looks like it's going to be a very good year for Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So just excited about Keenan Allen and where he's at so far.
Yeah, Ryan, absolutely. And I hate to say this, but the Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are sort of the Kawhi Leonard and Paul George of the NFL. They're sort of the Clippers version of that, where, hey, in theory, if these two guys could ever be on the court together and play a meaningful season together, it's going to be potentially dynamite. And I think it's kind of the same element there with Allen and Mike Williams. And so, but the LA brethren kind of share an analogy there. Ryan, I love what you said about Keenan Allen. I couldn't agree more. I think he was very much banged up last year and kind of had to fight through the pain. He's 100% healthy this year. I love kind of that duality that you're talking about in the Kellen Moore offense, and it's a rare one. When you think about the best receivers in football, invariably, they're either guys that run longer routes or are kind of more slot guys. Like when you think about, as great as Cooper Kupp is, you still think of him more as sort of a slot guy. He's not going to sort of blow the top off a defense, even though he gets behind the defense from time to time, but that's kind of his game. But when you think about a Tyreek Hill, when you think about a Waddle, they're so much deeper. To me, the only guy that kind of is really elite at both is Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase can be a slot guy and a deep guy, and I think it's just a very rare skill set. And I think Keenan Allen, when healthy, can be right there in terms of, you talk a lot about the NBA of like two-way players. Who's like the best two-way player? Who's the top 5 two-way player? I think there's kind of this element of two-way receivers. And I think when Keenan Allen is healthy, he can be a top 3 to 5 two-way receiver in terms of both kind of slot as well as his ability to kind of stretch it wide. And I think we're going to see remnants and elements of that this year in a very significant way. And I think the third element, Ryan, to build on your point of why he's sort of so rejuvenated is I think he's also feeling the urgency given his age. And also they essentially, without saying it, drafted his replacement. And, you can argue whether Q is more Mike Williams or whether he's more Keenan Allen, and time will tell. But at the end of the day, the organization said, we're going to not spend a 2nd-round pick or a 3rd-round pick. We're going round 1 on a receiver. That's a message. And if you're a competitor and someone who has produced at such a high level over the years that Keenan Allen has, that's going to fire you up. And, pressure busts pipes or pressure makes diamonds. And for the guys that have performed at a high level, it raises their bar. And so I think all 3 of those elements have sort of come together for Keenan Allen this year to have potentially a big year.
Yeah, well said. Couldn't and cannot wait to see Really just can't wait to see them on the field because we won't see them
Yeah.
still for 3 more weeks till the regular season kicks off. But it's so exciting to hear and see how well camp is going and how much they're integrated in this offense. And I mean, you could argue this is the most dynamic receiving core Kellen Moore's had in calling plays. There was obviously talent in Dallas, but I don't think they had the pure talent they have from 1 through 5 that there's in LA right now. So being able to see Kellen Moore utilize that talent and seeing this talent utilize the scheme is just going to be, I think, a perfect, mesh and a perfect build. So it's going to be fun. Last thing, Jamal, and we'll wrap up our Chargers talk. And I'll go first. I can give you time to think, but I want to hear, what are you looking for most in this second preseason game against the Saints on Sunday? So I'll start so I can give you some time to think. And where I'm looking at most, I think, is going to be that safety position. We know Derwin James is all world. Alohi Gilman, I think, he has definitely taken siege of that starting safety position next to Derwin James, but he's a little banged up, wearing the sleeve, knee contusion. Brandon Staley said in his presser it's not concerning, not long-term, but he'll probably sit out, I would assume, almost the rest of camp until week 1 starts. But the big question on the safety in general has been how the depth has looked. Drafted J.T. Woods last year in the 2nd round, drafted Mark Webb the year before that in the 7th round. You obviously have Lane as well as another depth player there. Last week in week 1, I thought J.T. Woods showed some good things, but also showed some mistakes that he demonstrated last year.
Yeah.
Poor pursuit angles,
Poor
tackling.
There was a couple
Obviously,
PIs. Yep.
Obviously the bonehead after the whistle penalty that put the Rams in 1st and goal, which was kind of a bogus call from what we could tell from the telecast, but either way, he got the flag. So I think he made up for that later in the game, but I want to see how he improves now in week 2. Mark Webb, unfortunately, I was super high on Mark Webb when they drafted him. To me, when they drafted Mark Webb, he was the Jordan Fuller of the Chargers, right? Brandon Staley was the defensive coordinator for the Rams when they drafted Jordan Fuller in the 6th round, surprised everyone, became the starter, became kind of the mouthpiece of that defense outside of Aaron Donald, and sees kind of not only as a top safety on that team, but really sees as a top premier player on that defense. Mark Webb was taken in the 7th round out of a premier organization like Georgia, and I was like, feels like a Jordan Fuller type pick. It's going to surprise people. He's drafted late, but he's going to show out and ball out. He got injured early in camp last year and then could never find his footing or just was never healthy enough to. So this was kind of his year to break out. And unfortunately had a rough go last week against the Rams. So really want to see how he has improved from them. You got to give him time when you're injured most of your rookie year. Like, you got to kind of write that off as this is now his rookie year. So got to see it though, because that's the one position. If Alohi Gilman, who's banged up right now, if one of them is banged up in the regular season, those are the guys. Yep. It's J.T. Woods and Mark Webb who's going to be starting. So that's what I'm looking at. I was probably way more long-winded than I need to be, but I'm looking at that safety position to see how they play, because there's 3 guys that'll play all game basically on Sunday. So what are you watching for most, Jamal?
No, Ryan, I mean, you said it really well. Secondary and safety was sort of where my head was going right as you were talking. And, you said it really well. Taking that off the board, I'm looking at running back. And I'm still not convinced about, we still sort of haven't seen Austin Ekeler, what he's going to be like in sort of any sort of a game situation, where his head is at. So I'm looking again at the growth from last week to this week at the running back position. And all the guys played really well. Is there going to be separation that's going to take place, not just from an RB2 standpoint, but potentially can one of these guys give Ekeler a run by week 3, week 4, week 5 of the season as being the primary back, depending on where he is? I still have a lot of questions about Ekeler, just given his offseason and his age, his durability, the tread, all of those things. So, is Dotson, was that just kind of garbage time against a Rams line that really, doesn't have much of a pulse right now at the edge? Or is this a situation where he's really going to come on? Is Spiller going to continue to do great things? Where's Joshua Kelley going to be? So I'm really looking for the running back position to say, hey, potentially a stronger line up front that the Chargers are going to be going up against, a feistier group top to bottom for 4 quarters, who can kind of separate in the backfield to sort of give Justin Herbert that complement, that RB2 that's so important in a Kellen Moore system, but also potentially a guy who, if he separates hard enough, can really give Ekeler a run to be RB1. So really excited to see the battle in the backfield.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think last thing I'll say to kind of double click on that, because I can already picture listeners and viewers like, what are you talking about? They ran for 219 yards last week. Like, the running game looked great. Like, it's so different. But I think what, I won't put words in your mouth, but what you're getting at and what I would also want to see is, can they take that game now and stack it into another performance and separate themselves even more? Because if we're being brutally honest, the Rams starting front seven might be one of the worst in football, not including Aaron Donald. And then the Rams third string front seven probably wouldn't be the fifth string on some teams. They're just that kind of, there's that lack of depth at those positions is very noticeable. And so it was, the Chargers running game looked phenomenal, but now let's see that against a better unit. And if they can stack that, that is going to be very promising. And they go into week 3, stack that again. And who's going to separate themselves as RB2?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, when you run the ball that easily for 200 plus yards, 5.5 yards a carry, you have to sort of ask yourself, are you that deep at the position, or is the team that you're playing fundamentally inferior? And really the answer for me was the latter. And so I want to be able to see, can not only the running game sort of translate, you're not going to be able to run for 200 plus yards and 5.5 carries every game by any stretch of the imagination, but who of these guys' performance is going to sort of carry over and translate and continue to play at a high level, because that's where the separation is going to occur for me. So as much as there's a lot of excitement about the running game, I want to see it against other competition, and particularly not just about the scheme, because Kellen Moore has always been a master of balance, whether it was his days in Dallas, frankly, whether it was his days as a quarterback at Boise State. Those were very balanced offenses. That's really where he learned offensive principles was from Chris Peterson at Boise State. But to me, it comes down to individual play in the backfield. Who's going to separate an RB2 across a plethora of competition, and who's potentially going to give Ekeler the run as RB1. So that's where kind of stats in a preseason game, you have to sort of take it with a pinch of salt. You have to really contextualize it.
Totally. So 2 great position groups to watch for Sunday against the Saints. We can't wait. A lot of excitement around this team, as there should be. Let's keep stacking them and seeing how this team progresses heading into the regular season. So all the time we got for Jamal Madney, I'm Ryan Dowd. Thank you all, Bolt fan, for hanging out with us. Drop any stuff you got in the comments. Follow us on Twitter at Ryan Dowd, LAFB, at LAFB Jams, at LAFB Network is the main account. Please like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and obviously check out LAFBnetwork.com. Talk to you guys all after the weekend as we recap the game. Everyone enjoy it. We'll talk to you later.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.